All right, we are moving on to our next dimension of the environment, which is communities. And so we're going to kind of look at some different concepts of what communities can mean, just kind of a traditional view and how it's evolved, but then also um, really focusing a little bit more on the technology piece and social media and kind of how virtual communities have evolved over time. And obviously, after COVID, they really played a significant role in people's lives because the only option to engage in community was really virtually because we were so limited in being able to do face-to-face activities. So, it's mentioned on Sakai, the narrative that's on there. The definition of community is that it's people bound either by geography, so that would be like location, or by webs of communication. So that's kind of more of a relational community versus a like a physical community. And so communities share common ties and they interact with one another. So just because you might physically be next to somebody doesn't mean that you're in community with them. And it gets kind of complicated because sometimes our geography and our relational communication overlaps with one another, and you might be in a community with a person in one way but not another. So it gets kind of funky, but we'll talk more about that. So, key concept in communities, and this one is really important, is there is one called a territorial community. So that's kind of that traditional, if you think about like your community, it's based on geography. So it's like where you live, where you work. I think where you live tends to be kind of the main reference of territorial communities. It just really goes back to the earliest form of community. So before you had phones or ability to communicate, you really could only interact with the individuals who were in your spatial proximity. So if you think of like the Wild West, or like the Oregon Trail, you had to travel between community and community. That's how you got your like basic needs met, your food, your like not your, well, I guess your groceries, I guess grocery shopping at the general store. But you would farm, you would marry within that community. If you left that community, people wouldn't necessarily know what happened to you until telegraphs came. And again, that was like delayed information. So your whole world and your functionality was really based out of your territorial community because that's how you depended on getting your needs met. So in contrast, we now have relational communities, and these have always existed. Even if you did like move away from your family or such, you would still have some sort of relationship, and culture kind of falls into like the concept of community as well. But if you're thinking about relational communities, it's a community based on voluntary interactions versus geography. So you kind of choose to join into this community. So if you are an individual who might have a certain medical diagnosis. So, let's say diabetes. So you might have a really strong connection to the diabetic community because you kind of have that like same experiences together. You have common interests. You might join on a walk to like raise awareness, or you might join a Facebook group talking about how do you get your medical supplies. There's a community for individuals who might have a child who is in NICU or was born early. So March of Dimes is kind of a formal organization that promotes that community, but it's kind of like you're choosing to be in it in some shape or form, and it's not based on geography. So this has really been a shift in towards communities because of technology. You obviously can interact with individuals from different territories, so like even in different countries or different states, you're able to still talk to them and have that relationship even though you aren't necessarily being able to go talk to them face to face. One of the communities that I am part of is my 4-year-old is she was born with a cleft lip and palate, and so when I found out that she was going to be born with that, I reached out to somebody who happened to be in my territory who, like, because she lives around here and is a wife of one of my friends. And I reached out and said, hey, like, I don't know anything about this. I'm really overwhelmed. Anything you can let me know about how to navigate this diagnosis would be super helpful. And she actually connected me with a Facebook group where it's anybody who has a family member with a cleft palate or cleft lip or both are able to join this and kind of share the resources and kind of give support. And it's been a wonderful community. I've learned so much from being in that community. And even from that, I have found individuals who are in West Michigan who also are part of this community. But then there's also, it's run by a lady in Texas. No, wait, she's in Arizona. So it's kind of like, I've joined this community because of technology, and I've actually gained a lot of support and insight and resources because of it. And that's not necessarily something I may have been able to accomplish as successfully or as efficiently if I was trying to find individuals solely in West Michigan. So there you go. You have territorial and you have relational. And so we're kind of looking at the concept of technology, like how has technology influenced these two different types of communities? And one of the big, like these two key concepts that are within technology is you have connections and you have ties. So connections are defined by our actual physical face-to-face interactions. And so you're going to get those well, not necessarily physical. It's just your interactions and connections with people is what a connection is. So if you're in a territorial community, previously all your connections would be face-to-face. You wouldn't connect with somebody unless you wrote a letter or you physically walked to them. And so territorial kind of had that very, very strong face-to-face connection. Now, with the relational one and with technology, you're able to connect with people all over the world and have some sort of commonality with them. So you also have the concept of ties, and ties tend to be, I guess if you're thinking about technology, you can replace the word ties with followers, because that's kind of what it is. It's the number of people whom we have those connections with. And so the higher the quantity of ties, they might lessen the substance or the quality or the more intimate connection when you have a significant amount of ties. And so ties are often formed through the relational communities because you're able to engage with a broader scope of people. So going along with our theoretical approaches to communities, we've had theoretical approaches to most of the dimensions. They do identify, I'm going to switch to the next slide. There's 5 different theoretical approaches to community. There's some similarities to other dimensions. You obviously have the systems, you have conflict. But these are kind of a very brief breakdown, because I'm trying to fit this all into one video of, excuse me, different theoretical approaches to community. So the first one is the contrasting types approach. And this is really looking at contrasting the concept of like rural and urban communities. So it's rooted in German words of Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. And so you're kind of looking at that personal and traditional, which is kind of the concept of like a rural community, and then contrasting against the more impersonal urban society. So you're kind of like thinking about like maybe more of like a farm community versus an industrialized community, and kind of what are the pros and cons of those. If you're looking at it through this lens, you might kind of weigh like transportation, the ability to bring goods into your community. Is that something that's available? Is it something that's not available? With more of the contrast of urban, are there more opportunities to engage in diversity of communities because you have more people there? But then does that become more impersonal because you're looking at community as more of a machine, whereas the rural might be looking at community as more of a way of survival and kind of those personal connections. The next one is the spatial arrangements approach. So it's looking at the community in regards to their spatial arrangements. So kind of how are they set up How are they spread out? How are they physically close to each other? Are they something more of a relational one there where the spatial arrangements don't really take into consideration because you're engaging in a method, usually technology, that isn't limited by space. And so you're kind of looking at how does that territorial piece either play a role in the community or is it something that's not present. Social systems, so you're looking at how communities can be understood by understanding the patterns of social interaction, their cultures and social structures. So this one really looks and acknowledges some of the diversity that can exist in communities. So if you're thinking about a territorial community, if you think about a neighborhood, how diverse is the neighborhood? Are individuals interacting with each other? Are they just simply houses on a street, or are they putting together a chili cook-off that they're doing to kind of engage with neighbors? And so and then how is each culture being celebrated within this territorial community? How is the structure? So if you're even thinking about like communities, neighborhoods, you have ones that have HOAs, the homeowners association. And so that's a social structure right there that might be impacting how individuals interact with each other. That if you have somebody who gets upset that you don't pull your garbage can up immediately, do they report you to the HOA and then you get in trouble because you happen to forget to bring up your garbage can? I'm not speaking from experience, by the way. Actually, I am. Because I live in an HOA and that was a recent complaint, not necessarily targeted at me, but we all got letters about how we need to pull up our trash cans in a timely manner, which I just love so much. So he's kind of thinking about like, here you physically live in this community, but how are you engaging within the community? Are you participating in the norms of the community, or are you simply living there and physically taking up space, but not taking up relational space? Social capital approach, so that's kind of looking at how cohesive is a community. So that can be looked at both territorial and relational. Because you might have, let's say if we go back to the example of my Facebook group for Cleft Moms, if somebody is continually like breaking the rules that have been established by this community, maybe I'm not because you're only supposed to post cleft related information. So maybe I'm trying to promote my business of selling soaps. I don't own a soap making business, but let's say I continue to like post things on there and that disrupted the community cohesion. Would I be asked to leave the community? Could I still stay in the community because I have a child with a cleft? Kind of those norms that are established and how does the person kind of interact and agree with that. And then the conflict approach is kind of looking at the power structures and patterns of domination and coercion within communities. So that could be looking at a community that might discriminate against individuals who might, like I live in Caledonia, who that tends to be a higher level of Caucasian individuals. So how do individuals of color navigate this community, the territorial community? Is it something that they feel accepted by? Is there some unintentional or intentional biases that they might have to navigate? So even like going to a school, is there enough diversity of staff that meets the community's needs? Is that matching? Is it not matching? Is it supporting all individuals? Is it not? So you're looking at those different power structures, whether they're put in place intentionally, or if there's some of those unintentional ones that you're looking at, kind of exploring what impact does that have on community participation, and individuals' willingness to engage within the community life itself. So that's kind of a quick down and dirty of communities. The book goes into more detail on these 5 different theoretical approaches, which you're probably going to want to utilize because there's going to be an exercise on the discussion board out kind of applying some of these approaches. So I would suggest using the book to kind of get a little bit more comprehensive approach, because this was kind of just like the brief, me processing it out loud with you, kind of exploration of the approaches. There you have it.